She lost everything when her millionaire husband left her for a young model. But years later, he didn't expect to see her show up at his own wedding, arriving by helicopter with quintuplets in her arms. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching this video. The smell of coffee and old paper clung to the university library long after the evening sun dipped behind the campus buildings. Students shuffled between tables piled high with textbooks, murmured to each other in hushed tones, or tapped furiously at their keyboards, racing against looming deadlines. Among them, Anna Carter balanced 3 thick psychology volumes on one arm while clutching a half-empty cup of black coffee in the other. Her shifts at the downtown diner had left her body aching, but her eyes burned with the determination of someone who had learned too young that survival demanded both grit and sacrifice. She spotted an empty chair by the tall windows, where the late light still fell in fading ribbons across the wooden floor. But when she reached the table, a young man was already there, surrounded by neat stacks of case studies and legal pads filled with orderly handwriting. He wore a plain gray sweatshirt, the hood pushed back to reveal sandy blonde hair that fell slightly over his forehead. His gaze was locked on the open textbook in front of him, lips moving faintly as if repeating formulas under his breath. Anna hesitated. "Is this seat taken?" she asked softly. The young man looked up, blinking as if surfacing from underwater. His eyes were sharp blue, the kind that caught and held attention without meaning to. He gave a small smile, half distracted, half apologetic. "Not unless you count the ghost of my GPA haunting me," he said, sliding a notebook aside. Anna laughed despite herself and set her books down. "Then I suppose I'll risk it." That was how it began. Jackson Reeves was a second-year student at the university's business school, a boy with a restless energy, always scribbling plans in the margins of his notes. He spoke not just of assignments, but of companies he wanted to build, ideas he wanted to test, investors he imagined pitching to. While other students talked about internships, Jackson talked about empires. Anna listened, amused and fascinated. Between classes and her long shifts, she didn't have much room to dream for herself. But she found herself captured by the raw intensity in his voice, the way he believed in possibilities no one else dared to consider. Over the weeks, their study sessions stretched into shared coffees, late-night walks across campus, and eventually evenings spent in her tiny rented room above the corner pizzeria. The walls smelled of grease and oregano. The radiator clanged like an old drum, but Jackson insisted it was the perfect headquarters for 2 visionaries in disguise. Tui. He would spread out his notebooks across her bed, talking through slides for a mock presentation, while Anna read them and offered corrections, circling phrases in red pen and jotting suggestions in the margins. One night, as rain tapped steadily against the window, he leaned back against the headboard and sighed. "You know, one day I'm going to own an office with windows taller than this whole building, and you," he pointed his pen at her, "you'll be there, telling me which of my ideas are insane and which might actually work." Anna rolled her eyes, though a smile tugged at her lips. "I already do that. The only difference is you don't pay me." "I'll pay you," he said quickly with mock seriousness. "In ramen, forever." She threw a pillow at him, and he laughed, catching it before it hit the floor. Their laughter filled the small room, mixing with the sound of rain and the faint aroma of baking dough from the pizzeria below. For months they lived like that, balancing classes, scraping together money, and dreaming. On weekends, Anna picked up double shifts, slipping extra bills into the envelope marked Jackson's tuition. He tried to protest, but she always silenced him with the same words. "We're a team. Your dream is my dream too." One night in spring, after finals week, they sat on the campus lawn beneath strings of lanterns set up for a festival. Music drifted from the student union, but they were lost in their own world. Jackson pulled a small notebook from his pocket, its cover frayed, pages filled with scribbles and charts. "This is the one," he whispered, showing her a page. "A construction startup. Not just building, but redesigning urban spaces. Eco-friendly, efficient. People will laugh, but I know it can work. We'd need capital, maybe an accelerator. But one day it could go public. We could be someone." Anna studied the page, her brows knitting together. She circled a phrase with her pen. Your budget projection here too optimistic, and you need a stronger pitch about community benefits. Jackson laughed softly. You never let me get away with anything. That's because you think like a dreamer, she said, and I think like someone who has to clean up after dreamers. He reached for her hand, fingers warm against hers. Then promise me something, Anna. Promise me that no matter what, you'll always be there. That when I build this, you'll be the one beside me. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. I promise. The summer passed with long hours at the diner for her and endless nights of planning for him. They celebrated their first anniversary with nothing more than a cheap bottle of wine and a single candle stolen from the diner supply room. Anna wore a thrift store dress. Jackson gave her a paper flower folded from one of his scribbled notes. Yet the way they looked at each other that night, full of devotion, full of fire, made it feel like the world was theirs. Years later, Anna would remember that evening whenever she lit a candle. The image of him across the table, eyes shining in the flickering glow, speaking of futures they had yet to touch. But for now, in the glow of youth and possibility, they were unstoppable. Two souls stitched together by hunger and hope, carving out dreams with nothing but willpower and secondhand notebooks. They had no idea how fragile it all was, or how quickly the world could take it away. The years that followed blurred into a rhythm of late nights, coffee-stained notebooks, and endless conversations about the future. Jackson Reeves had finished his business degree with honors, armed not only with a diploma, but with the restless ambition that had always driven him. He landed his first internship at a construction and development company in San Francisco, and though the pay was modest, he wore the suit as if it were armor. Anna stood beside him the morning he left for his first real job interview. He had borrowed a tie from a friend, the knot slightly uneven, his hands shaking with nervous excitement. She reached up, straightened the knot, and smoothed the fabric against his chest. You'll be fine, she whispered. I'm terrified, he admitted with a short laugh. What if I stumble? What if I say something stupid? You'll stumble, she said matter-of-factly, and you'll probably say something stupid, but they'll see the fire in you. That's what I saw. His blue eyes softened as he kissed her forehead. How do you always know what to say? Because I know you, she replied simply. He left that morning, shoulders squared, determination etched across his face. Hours later he returned, his grin wide enough to split the world in half. He had been hired. The first step had been taken. For Anna, the celebration was not champagne and caviar, but a simple pizza shared in their tiny kitchen, lit by the warm glow of a single lamp. Jackson raised his glass of soda with the air of a man toasting the beginning of an empire. To the future, he declared. Anna clinked her glass against his. To us. The internship quickly became a full-time position, and soon Jackson was spending more hours at the office than he ever had in class. He absorbed knowledge like a sponge, staying late to study blueprints and shadow project managers. His supervisors praised his initiative, calling him a rising star. At home, he shared stories of the meetings he attended, the deals he overheard, the way executives carried themselves. Anna listened, smiling, though a quiet ache settled in her chest each time he mentioned names she did not know, worlds she could not touch. She had finished her degree and found work as a school teacher. The pay was modest, but she loved the children, the chalk dust on her fingers, the joy of watching young faces light up with understanding. Yet when Jackson spoke, it was always of things larger, grander, beyond the walls of her classroom. Still, she supported him with every breath. She took extra shifts at the diner during summers, slipping her earnings into a separate envelope marked with his name. When Jackson discovered it one evening, while searching for a receipt, he stared at her in disbelief. Anna, you can't. This is your money. You've been killing yourself working nights, and you've been saving for me? She shrugged, embarrassed. We're a team. Your dream is my dream. His throat tightened, and for a rare moment, his endless words failed him. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I don't deserve you, he whispered. They managed to buy a small house in a quiet suburb after Jackson's first promotion. It was not grand, but it was theirs. The paint peeled in places, The yard was more weeds than grass, but Anna loved it fiercely. She planted flowers by the walkway, painted the nursery a soft blue when they discovered she was pregnant. The day Ethan was born was a blur of pain and joy, of sterile hospital walls and the sound of a newborn's first cry. Jackson, usually so composed, wept openly as he held the tiny bundle in his arms. "I'll give him everything," he promised. "He'll never want for anything." Anna, exhausted and drenched in sweat, smiled weakly. "All he needs is love," she murmured, though she wasn't sure he heard her. Those early years were a balance of chaos and wonder. Anna juggled motherhood with teaching, while Jackson poured himself into his career. At first, he came home with stories of new opportunities, eyes alight with possibility. They would sit at the kitchen table late into the night, Anna cradling Ethan, while Jackson sketched out visions of a company he might one day build. But slowly the conversation shifted. He began speaking less of us and more of I. The future he once painted for them both became a canvas dominated by his signature alone. One evening after Ethan had finally fallen asleep, Jackson spread out a set of architectural renderings on the kitchen table. His suit jacket was slung over the chair, tie loosened, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. "Look at this," he said, eyes gleaming. "A mixed-use, complex residential, retail, eco-friendly. If I can get the right investors, this could be my first solo project." Anna leaned over the drawings, tracing the neat lines with her fingertip. "It's beautiful, but the budget seems—" He cut her off with a quick wave of his hand. "I'll make it work. That's what I do. You'll see." She pressed her lips together, swallowing the words she wanted to say. He no longer asked her to circle errors in red, no longer waited for her input with patience. Her role was shifting, though she could not yet name how. As Jackson's salary grew, so too did their lifestyle. He traded his old sedan for a sleek black car, his discount suits for tailored ones. Their modest house began to fill with designer furniture, expensive artwork, things Anna never would have chosen. She still wore the same 2 pairs of work shoes until the soles thinned, still packed her lunches in reused containers. But Jackson lived as though success required a visible performance. When his company sent him on his first business trip to New York, he called her from a penthouse hotel, describing the glittering skyline outside his window. Anna held the phone tightly, glancing at the baby monitor where Ethan stirred in his crib. "I wish you were here," Jackson said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I wish I was too," she replied softly, though she knew even if she were there, she would not belong in his world. And yet, she clung to hope. Every time he came home exhausted, she massaged the tension from his shoulders. Every time he doubted himself, she reminded him of the boy she'd met in the library, scribbling impossible dreams in the margins of his notebooks. They celebrated Ethan's 2nd birthday with balloons in the backyard and a cake that Anna baked herself. Jackson arrived late, still in his suit, smelling faintly of cologne and city air. He kissed Ethan's head distractedly, offered Anna a tired smile, and retreated to his study to answer emails. That night, as she tucked Ethan into bed, Anna whispered to herself, "It's just a phase. He'll come back to us." But even then, she felt the distance stretching like an invisible thread, pulling him further and further away. The cracks were small then, almost invisible, yet in time they would split wide open, reshaping everything they had built. The autumn leaves drifted across the driveway of their suburban home, golden and brittle beneath the wheels of Jackson's new car. It had been 3 years since Ethan's birth, and though the boy's laughter filled every corner of the house, Anna could feel the silence between herself and her husband deepening with every season. Jackson was rarely home before midnight. His company had grown, and with it his responsibilities. There were meetings that bled into dinners, dinners that bled into drinks, drinks that ended with hotel reservations in cities Anna never saw. At first she excused it as ambition, the natural consequence of his career. But soon the excuses sounded hollow even to her own ears. She would wait at the kitchen table long after Ethan was asleep, a single lamp burning above her head, the dishes cold, her own appetite gone. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway would send a spark of hope through her chest, only to be extinguished when Jackson walked through the door, his tie loosened, his phone still pressed to his ear. He would wave absently, mouth a silent apology, and disappear into his study. The glow of his laptop the only sign of life behind the closed door. One night, Anna couldn't take it anymore. She followed him down the hallway, the carpet soft beneath her bare feet, and leaned against the frame of his office. "Do you even know what day it is?" she asked. He glanced up, distracted, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "It's Wednesday." "It's Ethan's recital," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "He looked for you in the crowd tonight. He kept asking, 'Where's Daddy?'" Jackson's shoulders stiffened, and for a moment guilt flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that distant look she had come to despise. "Anna, I had a meeting with investors. It wasn't optional. This deal could change everything for us." She crossed her arms. "Everything for us, or everything for you?" His jaw clenched. "Don't start." "I'm not starting. I'm begging," she whispered. "I feel like I'm raising our son alone. I feel like I don't even know you anymore." For a long moment, he said nothing. The only sound was the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Then he sighed, closed his laptop, and looked at her with weary eyes. "I'm doing this for him, for you, so we don't have to worry about bills, so we don't have to live paycheck to paycheck." "Isn't that what we wanted?" Anna swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that behind the late nights and expensive cologne, he was still the man who had eaten ramen noodles with her in a cramped apartment. The man who once promised that their love was enough. But as she walked back to their bedroom alone, she realized she wasn't sure anymore. Weeks turned into months. The cracks widened. Jackson's voice grew sharper when he spoke to her, his patience thinner. She began to notice things she couldn't ignore. Calls he took behind closed doors, laughter on the other end of the line that didn't belong to a colleague. A new fragrance clung faintly to his shirts, not her own. One evening, as she folded laundry in the living room, Ethan toddled in, dragging his toy dinosaur. "Mommy, why doesn't Daddy eat dinner with us?" he asked, his wide eyes filled with innocent confusion. Anna's chest tightened. She forced a smile and smoothed his hair. "Daddy's working very hard, sweetheart, but he loves you very much." "Do you love him?" Ethan asked. The question stunned her. Out of the mouths of children, truth often came uninvited. She bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I always will love the part of him that gave me you." That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Anna sat in the darkened nursery, staring at the soft blue walls she had once painted with such hope. She remembered the promises Jackson had made, the dreams they had shared. But the man who came home each night felt like a stranger inhabiting her husband's skin. Another stormy evening arrived, rain hammering against the windows. Jackson finally returned, drenched but smelling faintly of an unfamiliar perfume. He moved quickly, as if hoping she wouldn't notice. But Anna's eyes followed him like a hawk. "Where were you?" she asked quietly. "Dinner with clients," he replied too quickly, avoiding her gaze. "In the middle of a thunderstorm? Without even calling?" He froze, then turned to face her. Irritation etched across his features. "Why are you interrogating me, Anna? Do you think I'm lying?" Her voice broke. "I don't know what to think anymore." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. He turned away, retreated once again to his office, and she sat on the couch, tears streaming silently down her face. That night, as the rain drummed on, she reached for the old notebook she had once kept, the one filled with Jackson's ideas and her handwritten notes in red ink. She flipped through the pages, each one a relic of who they once were, and for the first time she realized she was holding a ghost. The man who had whispered dreams into her ear beneath strings of lanterns, who had promised ramen and forever, was gone. In his place stood someone harder, colder, consumed by ambition. And though she didn't want to admit it yet, a quiet certainty settled in her chest. The love that once bound them was unraveling, thread by fragile thread. The evening of the gala began like a ritual. Anna stood before the tall mirror in their bedroom, adjusting the deep emerald gown she had chosen weeks earlier. The dress was not new. It was the same shade she had worn on her very first date with Jackson back in college, back when everything was still possible. She had hoped the color might stir something in him, might remind him of the life they had once shared. The house was silent except for the faint rustle of fabric and the hum of the heater. Down the hall, Ethan slept in the care of a babysitter. Anna lingered for a moment beside his bed before leaving, brushing a kiss across his soft forehead, her heart whispering a prayer she could not voice aloud. Let this night bring us closer again. The gala hall shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble. Wealth and ambition walked hand in hand across the room in glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Anna clutched her clutch purse a little too tightly as Jackson guided her through the crowd, his hand resting on her back with a gesture that felt more like habit than affection. His smile was perfect for the cameras, his voice smooth for the investors, but to her he felt like an actor playing a part. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the cause of the evening, the Children's Literacy Foundation she herself had been passionate about long before Jackson's company ever found success. But everywhere she looked, he was just out of reach, moving from one cluster of executives to another, laughing, shaking hands, speaking in a language of deals and promises that no longer included her. Anna wandered to the champagne fountain, the bubbles rising in golden streams, and that was when she saw them. Savannah Brooks. She was younger than Anna by a decade, a model with the kind of beauty that drew every gaze in the room. Her jawline was sharp enough to wound, her eyes glittered with ambition disguised as innocence. And there was Jackson beside her, leaning in, laughing at something she whispered. His hand, oh God, his hand rested casually on the small of her back, as if it had always belonged there. For a moment Anna couldn't breathe. The sound of the room fell away, the music blurred, and all she could hear was the rush of blood in her ears. She set her glass down carefully before it could slip from her trembling hand. She didn't make a scene. She never did. Instead, she turned, walked away, and found herself in the shadow of the balcony, staring out over the city lights. Inside her chest, something grew very still. 3 weeks later, it happened. It was a Wednesday evening. Rain tapped steadily against the tall windows of their living room. Jackson came home earlier than usual, his hair damp, his suit slightly disheveled. He did not sit. Instead, he paced the room like a man preparing for war. I think we've grown apart, he said finally, his eyes fixed on the floor. Anna sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her wedding ring, once a symbol of forever, felt heavy and suffocating. Her voice, when it came, was calm. There's someone else, isn't there? The hesitation before his answer was louder than any confession. I didn't plan it, he muttered like a child caught in a lie. Her heart fractured. She remembered all the nights she had waited at the kitchen table, the dinners gone cold, the perfume that wasn't hers. She had known. Deep down, she had always known. She didn't cry then. She sat still, listening to the rain, her silence heavier than anger. 2 days later, he left. He packed his clothes into neat suitcases, promised to handle everything respectfully. The words sounded rehearsed, like lines from a script. Anna stood in the doorway, watching him go, her arms wrapped around herself. He kissed Ethan on the head, promised he'd always be there for his son, and then walked out into the rain without looking back. The next morning, a courier delivered the divorce papers. Not him. A courier. The settlement was generous enough on paper. He left her the house, though the mortgage was only half paid. He agreed to monthly support, but the money felt hollow against the weight of everything she had given up: her savings, her youth, her faith. The press, ravenous as ever, feasted on the story. Jackson Reeves, Silicon Valley's golden boy, back on the market. They fawned over his new muse, Savannah, photographing their vacations in Monaco, their matching designer outfits. Anna's name barely appeared in the headlines. When it did, it was always preceded by former or ex. Former wife, ex-teacher. As though her identity had expired the moment he walked out the door. Weeks passed in a blur of silence. Anna kept herself together for Ethan, smiling when he was awake, collapsing in tears only when he was asleep. She hid her sobs behind the locked bathroom door, the shower running to drown out the sound. Then one afternoon, as she bent to pick up a package from the front step, her vision blurred. The ground tilted beneath her. She collapsed onto the cold marble floor. A neighbor's frantic knock, the blare of an ambulance siren, and then the sterile walls of a hospital room. Dr. Ruiz, kind-eyed and gentle, entered with an ultrasound printout in her hand. "You're pregnant," she said softly. "And there's more than one heartbeat." Anna blinked. "That's impossible. He left weeks ago. We were barely—" "It was enough," the doctor replied. Anna stared at the screen, at the grainy black and white image of not one, not two, but 5 tiny flickers of life. Quintuplets. The word rang in her ears like a bell toll, echoing through the emptiness inside her. She lay in the hospital bed that night, the hum of machines around her, her hands trembling over her flat stomach. For the first time since the divorce, she wept openly, not for Jackson, but for herself, for the children, for the impossible future that had just begun. And in that moment, she understood. Her story was no longer about betrayal. It was about survival, about transformation, about becoming unbreakable. The days after the hospital blurred into fragments of exhaustion and disbelief. Anna would wake in the middle of the night drenched in cold sweat, her hand pressed against her stomach, as though needing to confirm that the impossible truth was still there. 5 heartbeats, 5 lives, a future she had never imagined, one she was now bound to face alone. The house was quieter than ever. Ethan's footsteps echoed across the hardwood floors, his laughter a fragile thread keeping her from falling completely apart. He was only 3, too young to understand why his father was gone, why his mother now cried silently while washing dishes, or why she often sat at the table staring at unpaid bills stacked like towers of failure. Her parents were gone, taken years earlier in a car accident. Jackson's family had vanished from her life the moment the divorce was finalized. Friends offered pity but little else. She learned quickly that the world moved on, even when hers had crumbled. The financial strain pressed harder each day. Though Jackson had left her the house, the mortgage payment felt like a mountain she could no longer climb. The support settlement seemed generous on paper, but with her teaching salary cut by maternity leave and the looming costs of a high-risk pregnancy, every dollar stretched thinner than silk. Hospital bills arrived before she even had the strength to open them. She tucked them into a drawer she jokingly called the abyss, though nothing about it felt funny. Anna worked as much as she could. On good days, she returned to the classroom, trying to ignore the nausea that rolled through her body like tides. She took tutoring jobs in the evenings, her voice growing hoarse as she explained fractions and essays while Ethan colored quietly at her feet. One night, after putting Ethan to bed, she sat at the kitchen table with a stack of unpaid utilities before her. The power bill, the water, the credit card. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone, ready to call and beg for an extension, when her vision swam again. She clutched the edge of the table until the dizziness passed. Her body was not only her own anymore. It was a fragile vessel carrying 5 tiny lives, and it was already straining under the weight. The next morning she returned to the hospital. Dr. Ruiz greeted her with the same steady kindness that had softened the blow of the first revelation. "Miss Carter," the doctor said gently, leading her into the examination room, "you must understand that quintuplet pregnancies are rare and extremely dangerous. Your body will be under constant stress. Bed rest may become necessary. There will be risks, complications for you, for the babies. You'll need round-the-clock monitoring." Anna swallowed hard, nodding though the words struck like stones. "I don't have anyone," she whispered. "No family, no partner." "You're stronger than you realize," Dr. Ruiz said, "but you'll need support, even if it doesn't come from where you expect." That night, Anna sat on the floor of what had once been the nursery that never was, the room she and Jackson had once painted for Ethan before he was born. Dust had gathered in the corners, cobwebs stretched across the window pane. She opened the blinds and let the sunlight in for the first time in years. Slowly, she began to imagine it again, not as a dream deferred, but as a command from life itself. With trembling hands, she made lists: pediatric specialists, neonatal care, supplies, car seats. The sheer volume was overwhelming, but writing it down gave her a fragile sense of control. Still, loneliness pressed in at every corner. Nights were the worst. After Ethan fell asleep, she would curl up on the couch, the silence of the house ringing in her ears. The weight of betrayal cut deeper in the darkness. She would close her eyes and remember Jackson's laughter with Savannah, the way his hand had fit so casually at the small of another woman's back. Rage boiled beneath her grief, but she refused to let it consume her. Instead, she began to write. At first, it was just a private journal, scrawled pages about pain, about starting over, about learning to breathe through betrayal. But one evening, after reading an article about online blogs, she typed her words into a computer and pressed publish. She signed it anonymously, calling her page Strong Enough. The blog became her midnight confessional. She wrote about the ache of folding laundry alone, the terror of doctors' visits, the humiliation of being reduced to the ex-wife of. She wrote about Ethan's small triumphs, about how his smile reminded her she wasn't broken beyond repair. She wrote about the 5 new lives inside her, how they terrified her and saved her all at once. At first, she assumed no one would read. But within weeks, comments appeared. Women from across the country, strangers, writing, "I thought I was alone. Thank you for saying what I couldn't." Widows, divorcees, abandoned wives. Each left pieces of their pain in her comment section, weaving a tapestry of shared survival. It was a lifeline. Yet the pregnancy battered her body relentlessly. Morning sickness lasted all day. Her back ached until she could barely stand. Her legs swelled, her breath shortened. She often fainted if she stood too quickly. By her 5th month, walking more than a few steps without support felt impossible. Ethan tried to help in the only ways a 3-year-old could. He would bring her glasses of water, tug blankets over her legs, kiss her cheek and whisper, "I'll take care of you, Mommy." Each small gesture kept her alive. One evening, Anna sat on the couch. Ethan curled against her side when he asked the question she had feared. "Mommy, where's Daddy? Why doesn't he live with us?" Her throat tightened. She brushed his hair back gently, stalling. "Daddy made a different choice, sweetheart. But you have me, and soon you'll have brothers and sisters." His eyes widened. "Really? Really?" she whispered, forcing a smile. She didn't tell him that she cried herself to sleep most nights, terrified of how she would feed 6 children on her own, how she would survive childbirth, how she would keep them all alive. But in the silence of that night, after Ethan fell asleep, she made herself a promise. She would not let these children grow up feeling unwanted. She would not let them inherit her heartbreak. She pressed her palm against her belly, where 5 tiny lives stirred, and whispered, "You will never feel abandoned. You are everything to me." Outside, the world had already moved on, splashing Jackson and Savannah's faces across magazine covers, celebrating their yacht parties and glittering vacations. Anna no longer read the articles. She refused to let them poison her. Her war was not against them. Her war was for survival, for her children, for herself. And so she endured. The collapse had come and gone. Now the fight to rise again had begun. The winter that followed was brutal, not just in weather, but in the constant battles Anna fought with her own body. Her pregnancy stretched her thin, both literally and figuratively. She could no longer climb stairs without gasping for air, and by the 6th month, she needed assistance to walk even short distances. But each day she marked another square on the calendar, each mark a small victory in itself. It was during one of these long nights, sitting upright against the couch cushions with her laptop balanced on her knees, that she stumbled across an email from a local philanthropist. He had read her anonymous blog, Strong Enough. The words in his message were simple but powerful. "I believe in what you're doing. Come talk to me about your ideas." At first she thought it was a scam. Why would anyone care about her? But when she researched his name, she discovered he was real David Foster, a retired tech executive known for his interest in community projects. Against her own doubts, she agreed to meet him. The meeting took place in a modest cafe near the hospital where she had her checkups. Anna arrived with Ethan holding her hand, her body heavy, her nerves raw. She wore the only maternity dress that still fit properly, a plain navy blue that did little to hide her swollen frame. David, however, did not look at her with pity. He listened. He sat across the table with his coffee untouched as she laid out her vision through trembling words. A center where children with disabilities and special needs could receive care, support, and education without their parents drowning in debt. "You've thought this through," he said after she finished, tapping the notebook where she had sketched her ideas. "And you've lived it. That's more important than anything. I want to help." She blinked at him in disbelief. "Help? How?" "With funding, with connections, with making sure this becomes more than words on paper." The tears that welled in her eyes embarrassed her, but she couldn't stop them. She had fought so long in silence, certain no one would ever believe in her. And now, sitting across from this stranger, she felt a door opening. Weeks later, with David's support in the small grants she had already won, Anna signed the lease for a worn-down storefront in San Francisco. The windows were cracked, the paint peeled, but to her it looked like a cathedral. It would be the first New Dawn center. The renovations were grueling, made worse by her pregnancy, but she was not alone anymore. Volunteers showed up, women who had read her blog, mothers who recognized their own struggles in her words, friends of friends who wanted to contribute. They painted walls, installed shelves, brought in secondhand furniture. Anna supervised from a folding chair. Ethan perched beside her with a coloring book, while she sketched diagrams of therapy rooms and classrooms. The day the doors opened, the sign above the entrance, freshly painted, Anna stood in the middle of the lobby with tears streaking her cheeks. She had expected only a handful of families to come, but dozens arrived. Parents with tired faces and hopeful eyes, children clutching stuffed animals or peeking shyly from behind their mother's skirts. One woman approached Anna, taking her hands. "I don't know you," she said, "but you've saved us. No one else would." Anna couldn't find words. She only squeezed the woman's hands tighter. News traveled quickly. A local journalist ran a small piece about the center, featuring a photograph of Anna surrounded by children. She wore no makeup, her hair pulled back hastily, but her smile was radiant. The headline read, "From Abandoned to Advocate, One Mother's Fight for Families." The story spread online. Donations trickled in. Soon invitations arrived, small conferences, panel discussions, community events. Anna hesitated at first, nervous about public speaking, but every time she thought of quitting, she imagined her children's future faces. She couldn't stop now. At one event, heavily pregnant and struggling to breathe, she stood before a crowd of strangers and told her story. Not the glamorous version, not the polished fairy tale. The raw truth, betrayal, abandonment, collapse, and survival. The silence in the room was so deep it felt holy. When she finished, the applause thundered. Back home, Ethan watched the video clip on her laptop again and again, his small chest puffed with pride as he looked up at her. "Mommy, you're famous." She laughed, shaking her head. "No, sweetheart, I'm just trying to help." But in his eyes, she was a hero. The months passed in a blur of exhaustion and progress. The clinic grew busier, the blog reached thousands, and Anna discovered a strength she never imagined she possessed. She was still terrified of money, of health, of the looming delivery that could take her life and the lives of her unborn children. Yet each day she woke and pushed forward. One evening, after putting Ethan to bed, she sat alone in the nursery she had once thought cursed. Now it was filled with 5 tiny cribs, soft blankets folded neatly, shelves lined with bottles and supplies donated by strangers who had become family. She lowered herself into the rocking chair, her belly heavy, her body aching, and whispered to the stillness, "We're going to make it. Somehow, we're going to make it." Her words trembled, but for the first time in a long time, she believed them. The first victories were small, imperfect, fragile, but they were hers, and they were only the beginning. The spring sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk outside the New Dawn Center, where children darted in and out of the doorway with the careless laughter only youth could carry. Inside, parents lingered in the lobby, chatting over paper cups of coffee, while volunteers arranged therapy schedules on clipboards. The air smelled faintly of paint and disinfectant, mixed with the sweetness of crayons and glue sticks. Anna sat near the reception desk, her body still fragile after giving birth months earlier. She had spent weeks in the hospital after the quintuplets came into the world, 5 tiny fighters, each clinging to life in their incubators, while machines beeped relentlessly around them. Against all odds, each baby had survived. Jason, Malia, Thomas, Ella, and Leanna. Their names filled her journal, her prayers, her every waking thought. Though she still moved gingerly, her energy drained from sleepless nights, Anna radiated a quiet determination that had begun to draw people to her like moths to a flame. Her blog was no longer a secret corner of the internet. It had become a gathering place for thousands of women. They left stories in her comment sections, sent letters, donated to her cause. And Ethan, her firstborn, her anchor, was growing into his own. At 6 years old, he had inherited his father's piercing blue eyes, but where Jackson's gaze had once been distant and calculating, Ethan sparkled with warmth and curiosity. He was protective of his siblings, standing on a stool to help feed them, fetching bottles, whispering promises into their tiny ears. It was Ethan who gave Anna her first glimpse of the movement she was building. One afternoon, a local reporter visited the clinic, notebook in hand, camera crew trailing behind. He wanted to film a short segment on the center's mission. Anna, weary but willing, agreed. She spoke about the importance of affordable care, about mothers who had been abandoned, about the need for community. When the cameras turned off, Ethan tugged on her sleeve. "Can I talk too?" Anna hesitated, then nodded. The cameraman crouched to Ethan's level, microphone lowered. "What do you want to say, kiddo?" Ethan straightened his shoulders, his small hands folded in front of him. "My mom is the strongest person in the whole world," he said simply. "She takes care of me, and my baby brothers and sisters and all these kids too. I want to be strong like her one day." The room went still. The cameraman's eyes widened. The reporter's pen froze midair. Anna felt her throat tighten, her vision blur. When the segment aired 2 nights later, it was Ethan's words that the network chose to feature. A clip of his bright, steady gaze. His small voice declaring his mother the strongest person he knew. Within hours, the video spread online, shared across social media, reposted on parenting forums, quoted in articles. "I want to be strong like her one day." The phrase became a rallying cry. Messages flooded Anna's inbox. Mothers wrote to her from across the country, saying that Ethan's words had given them hope, that they too wanted to be strong, for themselves and their children. A woman in Florida confessed she had been on the edge of giving up after her divorce, but seeing Ethan speak about his mother had stopped her. A young widow in Ohio wrote, "Your son gave me permission to keep fighting." Anna sat at her kitchen table late into the night, reading message after message, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She had started writing to survive, never expecting anyone would listen, and now somehow her survival had become someone else's lifeline. Invitations followed. Conferences, podcasts, interviews. Her inbox filled with offers from publishers, organizations, even television producers. Anna hesitated. Fame was not her goal. She did not want to turn her pain into spectacle, but she also knew the power of being seen. If her story could build bridges for others, she could not hide. At a women's leadership summit in Oakland, Anna took the stage for the first time in front of a large audience. Her hands trembled, her heart raced, but when she looked down at the front row, she saw Ethan sitting proudly beside Mrs. Parker, the neighbor who had become family. His face glowed with pride, as if he alone believed she belonged there. Anna told her story, not polished or rehearsed, but raw. She spoke of ramen noodles in college, of nights waiting for Jackson to come home, of betrayal and abandonment, of collapsing in her hallway and waking to the news of 5 new lives. She spoke of fighting through hospital stays, of writing in the dark, of building a clinic with little more than determination and strangers' kindness. The auditorium was silent. When she finished, the applause rolled like thunder. Women surged forward afterward, many with tears streaming down their faces. Some hugged her, others simply whispered, "Thank you." Later that night, Ethan climbed into her lap, wrapping his arms around her neck. "See, Mommy, I told you, you're the strongest." Her chest ached with love. "No, Ethan," she whispered into his hair, "you're the strongest. You made me believe I could do this." The following weeks brought more momentum. Donations doubled, volunteers poured in, new centers began to open in nearby cities. Anna's blog grew into a formal platform, offering resources, support groups, and workshops. She named it Resilient Roots. Still, the work was grueling. Sleepless nights stretched longer, the quintuplets demanding constant attention, her body aching from the unending cycle of feeding, changing, comforting. Some mornings she sat on the kitchen floor in tears, clutching a cold cup of coffee, convinced she couldn't go on. But then Ethan would appear, placing his small hand in hers, and she would rise again. The cracks Jackson had left in her life were still there, scars she would carry forever. But each day she saw her children's faces, she understood that strength was not the absence of pain. It was the decision to keep walking forward despite it. She was no longer just surviving, she was becoming something else, a symbol, and she owed that transformation, in part, to her son, the boy who had looked at her through the lens of a camera and declared her strong enough for the world to hear. By the time the quintuplets were toddlers, chaos had become the rhythm of Anna's life. The house was alive with noise at every hour, Jason's steady voice bossing his siblings into order. Malia's high-pitched giggles, Thomas's quiet humming as he built towers out of blocks, Ella's endless questions, and Leanna's dramatic squeals demanding everyone's attention. Ethan, now older and fiercely protective, moved among them like a small guardian, ushering order where he could, breaking up quarrels, fetching bottles, reading bedtime stories aloud. To outsiders, Anna's life looked impossibly overwhelming. Yet to her, it was a miracle. Every tantrum, every sticky handprint on the wall, every sleepless night was a reminder that she had not only survived, she had built something no betrayal could erase. Resilient roots had grown far beyond her imagination. What began as a blog was now a full-fledged nonprofit with a staff, volunteers, and branches across California. They offered free childcare for single mothers, legal support for women in custody battles, therapy sessions, job training programs. The centers bustled with life mothers laughing together in kitchens, children sprawled across colorful rugs drawing with crayons, staff guiding workshops in classrooms once abandoned. It was during a quiet evening at home, with the quintuplets finally asleep and Ethan curled up beside her on the couch, that Anna first saw the headline. Tech mogul Jackson Reeves to wed model Savannah Brooks in San Francisco ceremony of the decade. The words blazed across the television screen, accompanied by glossy footage of Jackson stepping from a sleek black car, Savannah's arm looped through his. She looked like a vision in diamonds and silk, her smile dazzling beneath the glare of cameras. The reporter's voice oozed excitement. The wedding is expected to draw celebrities, CEOs, and politicians. Sources say it will be the social event of the year. Anna's chest tightened, but not with the raw wound she had once felt. The pain had dulled over the years into something closer to recognition, like pressing on an old scar. She clicked the remote, the screen going dark. Ethan glanced up at her, curious but said nothing. He was old enough now to sense when a subject should not be pushed. She sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. Once, years ago, she might have curled into herself, wept until her body ached. But now she had no time for tears. Not when 5 children needed her. Not when a movement relied on her strength. The following morning brought a different kind of news. An official letter arrived in the mail, embossed with the seal of the United States Department of Health and Human Services. Hands trembling, Anna opened it at the kitchen table, her children crowding around her legs. The words blurred through her tears as she read, "In recognition of your groundbreaking work in pediatric and maternal advocacy and for your leadership in creating sustainable community programs, you are hereby awarded the National Medal of Service. The ceremony would be held in Washington, D.C. with media coverage nationwide." Anna stared at the letter, overwhelmed. For years, she had fought silently through betrayal, through exhaustion, through nights when she thought she couldn't go on. And now her name would be spoken in the halls of power. Not as the ex-wife of Jackson Reeves, not as the former teacher, but as Anna Carter, advocate, mother, founder. When she told Ethan, his face lit up. "I told you, Mommy," he said proudly. "You're famous, but not like them. You're famous for helping people." She laughed through her tears, pulling him into her arms. "That's the only kind of famous I ever want to be." News outlets soon picked up both stories, the glittering details of Jackson's upcoming wedding and the announcement of Anna's national award. Though the two narratives never crossed in print, the parallel was unmistakable to anyone who knew their history. One headline read, "Reeves' empire expands from business to marriage." Another declared, "Single mother of 6 to receive national honor." The contrast was striking. One life lived in champagne and chandeliers, the other built in diapers and midnight typing sessions. Yet both somehow were leading toward an inevitable intersection. On the night of the award ceremony in Washington, Anna stood backstage, her hands clammy despite the steady voice she had cultivated through years of public speaking. The children were at home with Mrs. Parker, safe and sound, but she carried them in her heart as she walked onto the stage. The applause rose, flashing cameras catching her figure in a simple cream suit, her hair swept back elegantly. She looked nothing like the young woman who once wept in the shadows of a gala while her husband laughed with another woman. She delivered her speech with calm conviction, her voice carrying through the grand hall. She spoke of resilience, of mothers who had been left behind, of children who deserved more than survival. She ended with a promise: "We are not broken by betrayal, we are rebuilt by love, and together we will raise a generation who knows the strength of rising after the fall." The standing ovation shook the hall. Back in San Francisco, the wedding planning for Jackson and Savannah continued with feverish anticipation. Magazines speculated about the guest list, the dress, the venue. Photographers camped outside luxury boutiques, eager for a glimpse. Anna did not seek out the coverage, but it was impossible to avoid. Their faces appeared on magazine racks at grocery stores, in commercials during the evening news, plastered across social media. And each time she caught sight of them, she felt not pain, but a strange sort of detachment, as though looking at strangers. She knew, however, that the world had a way of circling back. Paths diverged and converged again. And though she did not know when or how, she sensed the collision drawing near. For now, though, she tucked her children into bed, kissed each small forehead, and let herself breathe in the life she had built. A life born of ashes, but thriving nonetheless. The world had crowned Jackson and Savannah king and queen of luxury. But Anna knew the deeper truth. Her crown had been forged in fire, and one day soon, their kingdoms would meet face to face. The wedding day dawned over San Francisco with skies so clear they seemed painted. The Grand Monarch Estate, perched on the cliffs overlooking the bay, had been transformed into a palace of light and extravagance. Rows of white roses lined the walkways. Chandeliers glittered even in daylight, and an army of photographers gathered at the gates, their lenses trained on the arriving guests. Limousines slid silently up the drive, each spilling out celebrities, investors, and politicians dressed in gowns and tuxedos worth more than most people's annual salaries. Inside, the ballroom gleamed. Musicians tuned their instruments in a corner, their violins humming softly under the chatter of guests. Waiters floated through the room with trays of champagne, their white gloves spotless, their smiles rehearsed. The air buzzed with anticipation, not only for the union of Jackson Reeves and Savannah Brooks, but for the spectacle itself, the proof of power, wealth, and triumph that the wedding promised to be. Jackson stood near the entrance, flawless in his custom tuxedo, every hair in place. He looked relaxed, confident, like a man who had conquered every challenge life had set before him. Cameras adored him, reporters flocked around him, investors clapped him on the back. Beside him, Savannah glowed like a jewel, her gown shimmering with crystals, her laughter bright and practiced. Together they looked untouchable. But outside, beyond the gates and the chatter, a distant sound began to grow. At first it was little more than a hum, easily mistaken for the wind. Then it deepened, a rhythmic thunder rolling over the cliffs, vibrating through the ground, rattling the champagne glasses on silver trays. Guests turned their heads, confused. Conversations faltered. The musicians paused, bows suspended midair. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable. Helicopter blades. Every head in the courtyard turned skyward. Against the perfect blue of the afternoon, a sleek black helicopter descended slowly, its polished frame catching the sunlight. On its side gleamed the unmistakable logo, New Dawn Foundation. A ripple moved through the crowd, gas, whispers, cameras snapping furiously. The helicopter lowered onto the manicured lawn with precision, the downdraft whipping rose petals into a storm, tugging at gowns and scattering champagne napkins. Guests shielded their faces, clutching at their hair, as the machine settled with a roar that drowned even the orchestra. The doors opened, and she stepped out. Anna. Gone was the timid young teacher who once trailed behind her husband at galas, her smile brittle, her presence unnoticed. The woman who emerged now was transformed. She wore a tailored charcoal gray suit, its clean lines emphasizing both strength and elegance. Her hair was swept into a sleek knot. Her heels clicked against the marble steps laid hastily to meet the helicopter's landing. She carried herself with quiet authority, every movement deliberate, her face serene but resolute. And behind her walked Ethan. No longer a wide-eyed child, but a young boy in a navy suit, holding a folder embossed with the same New Dawn logo. He looked steady, proud, his gaze meeting the crowd without fear. The murmurs swelled into astonishment. Many guests recognized her from television, from the magazines that had chronicled her rise. Anna Carter, recipient of the National Medal of Service, founder of Resilient Roots, the woman whose name had become synonymous with resilience itself. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. Inside the ballroom, Jackson froze. His champagne glass trembled in his hand, his practiced smile faltering for the first time in years. He turned toward the sound, his heart slamming against his ribs as he caught sight of her crossing the courtyard. Time folded in on itself. Suddenly he was 20 years younger, sitting in a shabby apartment above a pizzeria, listening to her circle his notes in red pen. But the woman before him was no ghost of the past. She was something more. The master of ceremonies, caught off guard but quick to recover, lifted the microphone. His voice echoed across the courtyard. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a most distinguished guest, Dr. Anna Carter, founder of the New Dawn Foundation, honored nationally for her work in pediatric and maternal health. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then swelling as guests realized what they were witnessing. Even those who knew nothing of her history with the groom stood, clapping as if compelled. The orchestra, recovering from the shock, struck a note of fanfare. Anna inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement, her expression calm, almost regal. She did not glance toward Jackson. Instead, she moved forward, Ethan at her side, the crowd parting instinctively to let them through. Jackson's pulse raced. Savannah's hand tightened on his arm, her smile faltering as she whispered sharply, "Who is she?" But Jackson could not answer. His throat was dry, his voice gone. He could only stare as Anna crossed the threshold into the ballroom, the echoes of helicopter blades still beating in his chest. The conversations that followed were no longer about the champagne, the gowns, or even the wedding itself. Every guest, every camera, every reporter shifted focus. The bride and groom, once the stars of the day, found themselves overshadowed by a woman who had arrived not in sequins or silk, but in triumph. And Anna, calm beneath the lights, knew that this moment was not about revenge. It was about presence, about showing the world that she had risen from the ashes, carrying with her not bitterness, but proof of survival, proof of power. The man who had once left her behind now stood in her shadow. The woman who had once been invisible now commanded the room, and the child who had once asked why his father never came home now walked proudly beside her, a living symbol of everything she had built. The wedding had been meant as Jackson Reeves's ultimate victory, but as the applause thundered around them, it was clear to all who the true victor was. The ballroom had never felt so electric. The chandeliers glittered above the hushed crowd, their crystals trembling as if they too had been unsettled by the roar of the helicopter blades. Guests whispered furiously, their voices like the rustle of dry leaves, every eye fixed on the woman who now stood at the center of the room. Anna's presence was not loud, not showy, but it was undeniable like gravity itself, bending the room toward her. Jackson tried to steady his breathing, but his composure was slipping. For years he had crafted an image of success, of control, of a life curated down to the last cufflink. But in the span of minutes, that image cracked. He could feel it, could see it in the way the cameras had shifted from him and Savannah to Anna, in the way guests leaned toward her with awe, in the way his chest tightened when he realized that for all his accomplishments, it was she who commanded the moment. Savannah's hand gripped his arm, nails pressing through the fabric of his tuxedo. "What is happening?" she hissed, her smile frozen for the cameras. "Why is she here?" Jackson swallowed hard. His voice felt foreign in his throat. "She's my ex-wife." Savannah's eyes widened, fury flashing beneath her flawless exterior. She withdrew her hand as if burned, turning away with a sharp exhale. Jackson barely noticed. His gaze was locked on Anna. She did not look at him, not once. She greeted other guests with a calm nod, exchanged a few quiet words with the master of ceremonies, and then stood to the side, Ethan still at her hand. The boy glanced around curiously, unbothered by the spectacle, his chin lifted in quiet pride. Jackson's heart clenched. His son, his firstborn, the child he had left behind without ever truly knowing. The ceremony resumed, but the magic had dissolved. The bride's entrance, once anticipated with feverish excitement, passed almost unnoticed. The vows, carefully scripted and rehearsed, were overshadowed by the unspoken drama simmering just feet away. When Savannah whispered her, "I do," the applause was scattered, polite, distracted. The guests were already turning their heads, already thinking of the woman who had descended from the sky like some avenging angel. After the final toast, as champagne glasses clinked half-heartedly, Jackson could no longer stand it. He excused himself from Savannah's side and crossed the room, weaving through the crowd until he stood before Anna. "Anna," he said, his voice low, urgent. She finally turned to face him. Her eyes, once soft and eager to please, were calm now, steady as stone. "Jackson." For a long moment, neither spoke. The noise of the ballroom faded, the laughter and chatter dimming to a dull hum. It felt as though the years between them had collapsed into this single fragile silence. "I didn't expect to see you here," he began. The words sounded foolish the moment they left his mouth. Of course he should have expected it. Her foundation's logo on the helicopter, the announcements of her award, he had ignored all of it, blind to anything that did not serve his world. "I'm sure you didn't," Anna replied evenly. He shifted, searching her face. "You've changed." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, more a quiet acknowledgement. "No, Jackson, I haven't changed. I've always been this woman. You just never looked closely enough to see her." The words cut deeper than anger ever could. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling. "Anna, Don't," she said softly but firmly. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. We both know what happened. You made your choice and I made mine." He swallowed, his throat dry. "I see him," he said, glancing at Ethan. He's grown. He looks just like you," Anna finished. "Yes, he does." Jackson's eyes burned, moisture gathering at the corners. "I've missed so much. I've missed everything." Anna's gaze softened for the briefest moment, but only for a heartbeat. "You missed it because you chose to, and I won't let you hurt him or any of them by coming back now out of regret. They have love, they have stability, they have me. That's enough." Jackson's breath hitched. He wanted to beg, to plead for another chance, but something in her eyes stopped him. Not anger, not bitterness, something harder, more final. Dignity. His voice cracked. "I just want to thank you for raising him, for doing what I couldn't." Her expression did not change. "This isn't about gratitude, Jackson. This isn't about us at all anymore. It's about the children. Don't forget that." The silence stretched again, heavy with all the words they would never say. Finally, she extended her hand. He hesitated, then took it. Her grip was steady, not warm, not forgiving, simply steady. "This isn't about forgiveness," she said, her voice clear despite the noise of the crowd. "It's about closure." And then she released him. Before he could speak again, Anna turned. She placed her hand gently on Ethan's shoulder, guiding him toward the doors. The boy walked proudly beside her, his small suit jacket catching the light of the chandeliers. Together they crossed the ballroom, the crowd parting once more, eyes following them with reverence. Outside, the helicopter waited, its blades spun slowly, the rhythmic thrum rising as they approached. The downdraft lifted the edges of her suit jacket, tangled a strand of Ethan's hair. For a moment, Anna paused on the steps, turning her face toward the estate one last time. The music from inside drifted faintly into the night, muffled by distance. She did not look for Jackson. She did not need to. With quiet dignity, she climbed aboard the helicopter, Ethan following close behind. The door closed with a final, decisive sound. Moments later, the machine lifted into the sky, its roar drowning out every other noise. On the ground, guests shielded their eyes from the wind, their voices drowned by the thunder of blades. Jackson stood frozen at the entrance, staring upward until the helicopter became a speck against the stars. The wedding of the year had ended, but not in the way anyone had expected. The story guests would tell for years to come was not of the dress or the cake or the vows. It was of the woman who arrived from the sky, who commanded the room without bitterness, who left not in defeat but in triumph. For Jackson, it was the moment he understood the true cost of what he had lost. For Anna, it was simply another step forward. As the helicopter carried her into the night, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply, the city lights glittering below. Ethan leaned against her, his small hand finding hers. "We're going home now, Mommy?" he asked. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing her lips to his hair. "We're going home." And for the first time in years, the word home felt like a victory, not a memory. If this story shocked you, hit subscribe right now so you don't miss what happens in the next ones. Check out the next video on your screen. Every story is more unbelievable than the last. And don't keep this one to yourself. Share it with friends so they can be just as stunned as you were.